An excerpt from Sem Bellwether's Notes on the Imber Conflict. For a great, long while, the most you might have ever heard said of Imber was that it existed. A desolate little desert planet, dotted with the ruins of old empires lost to the sand and dust, barely habitable, save for a small patch of green in that big stretch of desert, an oasis called the Basin. Hardly notable at all except for the beacon planted squarely in the center of that basin, a lighthouse for interstellar travelers in what amounted to little more than a galactic pit stop. For centuries, Imber was just another planet passed between the ostensible rule of one power after another, home only to the keepers of that lighthouse and a small handful of smugglers, prospectors, and nomads seeking refuge from the hustle and bustle of the wider galaxy. Imber might just have stayed that way for a few centuries longer, too, if it had not come to the attention of that leviathan of trade and commerce which they call the Honourable Commonwealth of Luctor. It was the Commonwealth's agents who discovered the immense reserves of orichalcum, that miracle metal which conducts the fundament itself, hidden beneath the surface of dusty old Imber. And it was the Commonwealth who set its great companies onto the task of incorporating the planet and developing it into something that might generate a profit. They came to Imber with great machines and countless workers, and they set about tearing into the quiet oasis of the basin in search of their harvest. Historians of a particular perspective will note, though, that the great advancements of empire are always paid for by the sacrifice of the bodies and lives of the workers who make it all possible. And so it was with the Commonwealth's work on Imber. For decades, they set about developing the quiet little frontier planet, spending laborers like coins to do it, and in so doing, they laid the soil in which the anarchists of the Ring planted seeds of revolt. In time, those seeds sprouted into saplings of revolution and insurrection, and the Ring itself came to Imber in response, bolstering the forces of those who decided they'd suffered long enough under Commonwealth's boot. For years, they fought it out and drew bloody lines in the dust of Imber, and who knows what way it might have gone had things stayed just that way. Perhaps the rebels of Imber would be a footnote in the planet's long history. Or perhaps the Commonwealth would have drawn its imperial hand back from the revolution's gnashing teeth. Those versions of this story we'll never know, because it wasn't so long after the revolution started that the skies here darkened once more in a harbinger of foreign arrival. The Concordat, that vast and ancient theocracy, zealots on a holy crusade to find their lost but still living God hidden amongst the stars, pillaging entire systems in search of a sign. Maybe it was the fighting that drew their eye, made them think there was something on this little twisting ball of blood and sand worth coming for. Maybe they're just hungry for more of that miracle metal to fuel their endless pilgrimage. It is not for me to speculate on the motivations of those guided by the divine, and they seem in no quick hurry to explain themselves. So what might now be said of dusty, not quite so desolate Imber, the little frontier planet once populated by smugglers, prospectors, and nomads? Well, now it bears the weight of a great battle between three parties whose wars of ideology rage all across this galactic network of ours. And I reckon whoever wins the day here won't have any guarantee of winning that wider war. But it's hard not to feel like this once forgotten place has become something like a proving ground. And may the fundament itself bless any poor soul who's been unlucky enough to get stuck here in the middle of it. Howdy, and welcome to Risky Standard, an actual play podcast featuring a rowdy group of best friends playing tabletop role-playing games together. I'm your host and GM, Mitch Broesder. You can find me on Twitter at MagnesiumB, if it still exists by the time this is airing. And you can find the show over on Twitter at Standard Risky. With me today, I've got Peter Loftus.
Hey, everybody. I'm Pete. I'm on Twitter, too, at Chips Enjoyer.
I've got Malcolm Hall here.
Howdy, Malcolm Hall here. Twitter is at Horde Scrum.
And lastly, we have with us Timothy Mans.
Howdy. Yeah. Hi, guys. So if you want to check out any of the dumb shit I say, you can head on over to Twitter at Axe Hoarder, and take a gander.
So, since this is the first episode, I just want to take a second at the top here to lay out exactly what this thing we're doing is. Like I said before, Risky Standard is an actual play podcast, which means we are playing tabletop role-playing games together to tell some fun stories as a group. And for our first campaign, we are going to be playing a game called Beam Saber, which was written by Austin Ramsay. You can find Beam Saber on Austin's itch.io page, which is Austin-Ramsay, ramsay.itch.io. You can also find Austin on Twitter over at NotInIn, INN, like a tavern. So Beam Saber is a Forged in the Dark game, meaning that it uses the core game engine developed by John Harper in his excellent game Blades in the Dark, which you can find over at bladesinthedark.com. So, per its own introduction, Beam Saber is a game about the pilots of powerful war machines in a war that dominates every facet of life. It is built to tell the kinds of stories that you see in like the mecha genre of anime, Mobile Suit Gundam, Votoms, a bunch of other ones that I'm not thinking of right now. And in this game, in this campaign that we're going to be playing using Beam Saber, we will be playing as a squad of pilots who have been caught up in a seemingly endless war and follow them and their trials and tribulations. Beam Saber does come with its own built-in setting that has like a lot of cool stuff going on. But for this campaign, we are going to be using it to tell a story set in our own original setting. And that story is very broadly about a squad of pilots fighting for an anarcho-socialist space federation, which is sort of waging a revolutionary war against other oppressive interstellar empires. I know the elevator pitch that we've like thrown about amongst ourselves before is Mobile Suit Gundam by the way of Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed. I think it was like a very, very heavy dash of Star Wars thrown in there. Yeah, so I think in a second we can meet the pilots that you guys are going to be playing and get into the action. But before we do, I kind of want to take a little bit of time here at the top to cover in a very quick and broad way the overall pitch for what the campaign is, what the world that this takes place in is, and the conflict that our game is going to be centered around. So just to paint the very broad strokes before we fill in the details, it's like a space fantasy setting. We are very much in a world unlike our own. It's going to be full of aliens and strange sci-fi technology. I think different kinds of like space magic. In terms of like touchstones, obviously like the Gundam franchise is very, very big to me, especially 08th MS Team, the kind of like ground war Gundam story. Science fiction authors like Ursula Le Guin, Arkady Martine, Ian M. Banks in the Culture series. Star Wars is like unavoidably large. Special big shout out to Andor, which I know some of us have watched, but not all of us, which is an enormous influence for me in conceiving a lot of where this campaign is going. And then also I would have to say Front of the Table, the actual play podcast, is like a huge, enormous, outsized influence, especially their Beam Saber season, Partisan, which everyone should listen to because it's excellent. I'm sure there's other stuff I'm not thinking of here in terms of inspirations. I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to shout out.
That's most of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's the soup that we're working with. Destiny, right? The video game Destiny.
Yeah, sure.
I'm looking, right. Me, I know this is me and Pete mostly, but Destiny rips, and that's a huge aesthetic influence, if nothing else. Yeah, I don't want to get too lost in the sauce, but so
Because you're going to see it.
Yeah.
I'll have a lot more to say when we talk about costumes and such.
Oh yeah,
Now
I mean,
it's-
like costumes here is part of that too for me. Destiny has great costumes, I'll say that. So yeah, just like big picture bullet points about the world, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of like the specific stuff. Then we'll meet these characters, and then we will jump into the action of Beam Saber. So ours is a world full of ancient and powerful relics from a lost era of civilization that preceded the current one. I think we're calling this the first era, kind of broadly speaking about it. It is a world inhabited by a wide variety of non-human sentient life, including synthetic and machine intelligences. It is also a place where incredible science fictional technologies and human abilities that border on the magical are enabled by an underpinning field of energy that we are referring to broadly as the fundament. And of course, like the big reason we're using Beam Saber here today, this is also a world where much of the work of war and industry is now performed by people piloting giant robotic vehicles. I think we're probably calling these mechs, unless we come up with like a better, cooler in-universe name for them.
I really liked armors too.
Armors, yeah. I keep using frames.
Frames, yeah. Maybe we'll like kind of play around with these and see which one kind of rises to the surface. So like specifically talking about the setting for this campaign, our game takes place on Imber, which is a remote planet whose surface has largely been consumed by uninhabitable deserts. For the most part, it is a world where sandstorms rage across the ruins of ancient cities, and temperatures rise and fall to unbearable extremes. However, it also hosts this small, anomalous little patch of land known as the Basin. And this is the only place on Imber where other biomes still exist and where people can comfortably survive from day to day. And for most of Imber's history, it has been kind of overlooked and sparsely inhabited with a small local population and kind of like two big notable features about it. The first of these is that it has what we're calling a beacon on it. And this is an ancient relic from that first era. And beacons are kind of interstellar lighthouses that are scattered across the galaxy, left over from this first era. And they are the things that enable interstellar travel. They guide starships safely through the darkness of space. And on Imber, a city called Coronatus has sprung up around this beacon. And it is kind of like the primary hub of civilization on Imber. And it's also where a big part of this campaign is going to take place. And the other major notable thing about Imber is that it is host to these vast deposits of a fantastical mineral called orichalcum. And orichalcum is the material that conducts the energies of this energy field called the fundament. And it is the thing that makes all of the big science fictional technology of this world possible. And it is the deposits of orichalcum which have become the primary driver of the conflict that our game is about. A big part of Beam Saber is the presence of factions. Factions are the large governing entities that are the groups waging the war that the game is centered around. The book features 5 types of these factions and bases them around what type of government the faction uses or is built on. But our story today is just going to have 3 of these factions. And so I think we can kind of cover these 3 factions really quickly, like the broad strokes. And then, we'll cede it to you guys. The first of these, the one that I mentioned before, I think, is a group called the Honourable Commonwealth of Luctor. And the Commonwealth they are like a merchant republic that controls the flow and trade of commerce across like a huge portion of the known galaxy. And in like the moment that we're joining the story, they're kind of in this big historical moment of great growth and expansion.
I'm thinking of like the latter days of the British Empire, like Dutch East India Trading Company.
Yeah.
Actually, so I was going to say, under the rules of Beam Saber, they are a corporatocracy, right? Which means they are largely organized under and controlled by the power of individual companies and corporations. So definitely, like you're saying, Pete, I think like the chartered companies from Europe in like the 16s and 1700s, this sort of like, heavy quotes around like age of exploration. These companies that have this ability to like go out and enact laws and start colonies and kind of like operate as like quasi agents of the state. And within the Commonwealth, a corporation known as the Heritage Mercantile Company has been given a charter of development for Imber. And for several decades, they've been overseeing the expansion of the Commonwealth into the basin of Imber. And they've been establishing mines and processing facilities for the orichalcum reserves on the planet. And as empires are wont to do, they have been exploiting the labor of the workers and the planet's inhabitants to reap vast amounts of profit for both the Commonwealth at large and this heritage company in particular. And then for the past few years in our timeline, their colonization on Imber has been disrupted by the eruption of a workers' revolt on the planet, incited and supported by our next faction, and the one that the player characters will be fighting for, at least at the start of things. We'll see, I guess, where it goes. And the second faction is a group called the Ring. The Ring is a communalist federation of worlds and communities aligned around a shared set of egalitarian values and a commitment to a praxis of permanent galaxy-wide revolution. They are fundamentally dedicated not only to maintaining their own extant communities, but spreading these ideals of freedom and liberation to oppressed people across the galaxy. On Imber, they have helped to foment a workers' revolt, which has escalated into a full-blown revolutionary conflict. And where we kind of like find them as we start this game, they have managed to carve out a swath of free territories under their control on the very fringes of the basin. And they're kind of trying to hold on to their hard-won victories out on the edge, while also fanning the embers of further rebellion and revolt within the enemy forces on Imber.
They're like the anarchist from the Dispossessed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. Like,
except they're tankies, kind of.
yeah, they're right. Like what if the anarchist from the Dispossessed were also like committed to this idea of like the galaxy isn't free until everyone is free, right? And so they are constantly like planting propaganda. They are sending supplies to like guerrilla rebels. They are kind of just like building up this revolution that keeps growing and spouting in different places. And then when it does so, they kind of send in support to it. And that's what they've done on Imber. And I would say like the big science fictional thing about them that enables this sort of communalist federation to exist and thrive despite all of the forces arrayed against it is that they have this unique machine intelligence, which is called the Gnostic and Material Distribution Logistics Apparatus, but which everyone in the Ring just calls the apparatus. And this thing coordinates the egalitarian sharing of resources and knowledge for the Ring across this like interstellar scale. And it is also here on Imber now, sort of helping plan out this ongoing revolution.
We love a Soviet-style long-ass name for something.
Absolutely. And yeah, so the third, the final force in the conflict on Imber is also its most recent arrival. And they are a theocratic empire known as the Concordat. The Concordat is one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. They are a theocratic monarchy, so a theocracy under the rules of Beam Saber. And they are founded on a religion known simply as the Faith. And they believe in a monotheistic deity that they call the Builder, whom they credit for all of the incredible relics and wonders from the first era that are spread across the galaxy. And they also think, or they claim, that the builder is now waiting for them in like a very literal, physical way, to be found somewhere hidden amongst the stars.
And how long ago do you think the Concordat like arrived on Imber with like an expeditionary force?
Probably like a year ago, right, or like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 at the max. They've only been here, I imagine. Kind of like the revolution is happening, the fighting is going on, and like it's getting like pretty rough, you know. There's like maybe the threat that the Commonwealth is starting to overwhelm the ring, and it's kind of like the territories it's holding on to. And then the Concordat arrives. It's like you said, they, in pursuit of this divine quest that is like kind of the central tenet of their religion, they send out, yeah, because you said, these massive crusade-like expeditionary legions that explore and establish strongholds in systems that lay outside their direct control. And so, yeah, you know, this truly happens. I think like there's just a moment in the war where suddenly the skies darken and this fleet of ships arrive in the Concordat land, and they start taking territory and establishing themselves, and, you know, claiming their divine right to the first era relics that are spread across Imber.
And we don't know a ton about the first era relics. Like they're just kind of a general mystery.
I think we know that they exist. You know, there's a ton of them. You know, this is like a. I don't think we cited it before. Probably Mass Effect is kind of like a big influence here in my head, in that like there's like all this stuff lying around, and I think a lot of the technology that exists in our galaxy today is kind of like reverse engineered from that, and so I don't think we know even if like the first era, like if this was like one unified civilization, or like what happened to all of those people, except that probably in the timeline it kind of seems like suddenly they all stopped producing things, and now a bunch of stuff from that time still is out and about. This includes the beacons, which I think are like what let people first start doing interstellar travel, figuring out how to go to other star systems. And so that way, you know, I think we probably get this, you know, very Star Warsy-esque like thing that happens where there are societies that develop space flight but are still using a lot of other technologies that like we wouldn't think of as being on the sort of same timeline in terms of like progress, like air quotes there as well. You know, if you find an old spaceship and get it working, but all you've been using is like swords before that, like you might still be using swords on your spaceship. And so out of all of the factions, the Concordat has the most knowledge of the fundament. They have like religious orders of dogmatic believers who dedicate their entire lives just to mastering its use. But they also have the greatest like horde of first era artifacts, which means that they have like these strange and esoteric technologies that other societies have never heard of, never seen before, which does, you know, like lends to this kind of like mystical element of their presence in this war. And yeah, so those are the 3 factions, and that is like the conflict here, right? Just kind of a question mark of exactly what the Concordat wants besides everything. But as I said before, we also know there's this huge supply of orichalcum, and orichalcum is the fuel and the material that you can use to build more of these like science fictional machines, right? That's like faster than light travel, you know, big laser guns. I imagine, right? Like we haven't talked about it extensively, but I think probably all of the mechs, the armors, the frames, whatever we call them, those probably have like fundament reactors, right? I think like you need orichalcum to build like the really cool, big, terrifying, you know, sort of fundamental technologies. And whoever kind of gets control over Imber is going to have access to this huge deposit of it. So I know that's a lot of exposition. That's like a lot of what's going on. I think that's kind of like the bare bones, so like what you need to know about the world that we're in, and that these characters are inhabiting. And I think, unless there's like any setting stuff that people had in mind that they wanted to hit, or anything else, I think we can kind of move into like introducing these characters and the squad that they're going to be a part of.
Yeah, boy, let's do it.
Cool. Anybody want to go first here? Anybody want to introduce their character first? No, don't all jump at once.
Sure. Right. Yeah, fine. All right. I'll go. Yeah. Okay. So again, Tim, but the character I am going to be playing is a character named Kardaheshketh. And in his group of friends, I guess the kind of what we're calling the call sign the game does is downrange, and sometimes shortened to DR. He is the scout of the group, and it's pronounced he, him. But yeah, so Cardi,
And so the scout is not just like what you do. That's also your
my playbook.
Beam Saber. You should say Beam Saber. Has character classes. It calls them playbooks. Yours specifically is the scout, right? You are the scout.
The scout, right? Yeah. So I guess just the basic history of Carda is that his parents, they were from a different planet, part of the Commonwealth. They came here to work as surveyors, and he came with them and grew up, following along with them. And one day he went out with his parents while they were on a job, and the Grenfield Surveying Company arrived, and there seemed to be some conflict. And in this conflict and scuffle, his parents were killed, and he witnessed it. He was probably off. He was out playing in the hills and saw it, and they kind of just left his parents to die there when he was a young boy. And he got the mech and left from there and kind of found his way to Coronatus, where he had to grow up quick. He had to grow up very quick, as any young parentless child does in a city like that. So I think he had to.
It's a real Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's story.
Yeah,
but roasted.
So he stole and got whatever work he could growing up in the city, and over the years, the more he reflected on it, the more he fomented this desire that he was going to kill the people that killed his parents. That this is, and I think that leads to, what gets him going every day, and is kind of the long goal. The
Beam Saber calls this, right? This is we're talking about your drive, right? So we're saying, Beam Saber specifically, characters have what it calls a drive, and the drive is, as Beam Saber says, it's what do you want to change in the world? Each pilot has an ambition, regardless of how they ended up in the war, and the drive is kind of the thing that your character is working towards more than anything else in the world. It's the thing that drives them. It's the thing that they're always trying to accomplish, above all else. And also, this is kind of a fun thing that Beam Saber does mechanically, is that when you select a thing as your drive, it actually becomes harder to do in the world, right? You have to work harder to make it happen. And specifically, as you work towards completing your drive, you will start filling up what the game calls a drive clock, just kind of a measure of how much you've worked towards accomplishing this thing. And you have to kind of accumulate filled out drive clocks and spend them to be able to actually accomplish the big picture drive that you want to accomplish. And on the biggest scale, to change really big things, a player is only limited to 2 drive clocks at once. But to change really big things, you need to spend 3 or 4 at a time, which means that you also have to kind of talk other players or other characters into also spending their drive clocks to helping you accomplish your big world changing thing. So just to get back to it, what is Carda's drive, kind of broken down simply?
Yeah, his drive is to hunt down and kill the people that killed his parents. What he wants to change in the world is their status of being alive to being dead. He's going to do that at whatever it costs.
Yeah,
that's what he wants to change.
Your drive is revive the undead parents that you've lost.
Yeah.
So I think that's just throwing it out there. That's spending 2 drive clocks to change the status of an individual person. I think 3 clocks to change the circumstances of a squad. So we can get in there when we get in there. But there's a question I think here that'll be fun to answer in the game of is it just the person who pulled the trigger, right? Or does Carda blame, this company that made that happen?
I think that's something that he has spent a lot of time thinking about. He doesn't know the name of the person who has done that, but he kind of has a vague recollection of maybe what that person looks like. But he knows that it's from the Grenfield Surveying Company, and if that's the place where he needs to start, he'll start taking out whoever he needs until he finds that person who did that. But yeah, so just to kind of touch on those points again real quickly. Concordat. He's 27 years old, 6 foot tall, blonde hair, gray eyes. Grew up working with his parents as a surveying. When they were murdered, he ran away with his parents' mech and kind of escaped to Coronatus, where he, made his way and taking odd jobs and kind of eventually getting into a little bit of like crime and hitman kind of work. As a scout, he carries a big sniper rifle with him and is quick to pull a trigger when it comes to that. So with that, his special. Do we talk about special abilities too?
Yeah, you have one, right? Yeah,
I got this. Special ability is Sharpshooter. When you push yourself in addition to the normal benefits, you can do one of the following. Make a ranged attack an extreme distance beyond what's normal for the weapon. Unleash a barrage of rapid fire to suppress the enemy. Ricochet a shot to hit a target indirectly.
Nice.
So that just comes with, him being the scout sniper kind of the group who that's something that he has specialized in, learned to train in as many days of anger, target shooting.
And you say, one last thing, and you have what we call connections and beliefs about the other characters. I think we'll do all of those after we've introduced everyone.
Cool.
But you have a mech you kind of like alluded to, right?
Yes. In our mech, our frame, our armor, whatever we end up calling it, it is it is called the, where is it? I know the name of it. It's called the Semaphore, and it was created by the Cadastra company. It's the ARMS, the Aerial Recon Mapping and Surveying model, and it is a bipedal mech with a mounted gun turret on the upper right corner that has like a platform that the pilot can go and stand up on, and it's kind of got like a physical like kind of cape and hood that can be pulled over it so that when he is shooting from it, he can kind of blend into the background, kind of like a ghillie suit kind of texture to it. So yeah, that is the Semaphore. And
we talked about this. Is this still true? I know we talked about this at one point. This is like your parents' old surveying mech that you've kind of like modified into a combat vehicle, right?
Yeah.
Sick.
So, over the time doing work for people in the city, sometimes maybe he traded in doing work for someone or something that allowed him to slowly build up this machine into what he wants it to be and not just a mapping model.
One last question here.
Yes.
Which will become relevant as we introduce these other characters in a moment. Carta is a human, right?
Yes. All right. Human. Of all the things I could have been in a world where anything was possible, yes, I have chosen to go with human male.
Someone's human privilege showing here.
Yeah.
We're all human. Right.
Yeah. Pete, Malcolm, one of you guys want to introduce us to the next member of this squad?
Sure. I can go next.
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing as Rhodes Rampart. Kind of top line, Rhodes is a sort of outlaw folk hero of the ring in hiding on Coronatus. He's a synthetic, which is to say, let me just get in character real quick here. He's a robot cowboy.
For listeners, because this is an audio medium and not a visual, Peter did just put on a cowboy hat.
Yep. Rhodes is a robot cowboy. His history with the ring is pretty long and storied. I think one kind of big piece right off the bat, Carter's a younger person. Rhodes is probably close to 150 years or so, much older than the rest of the squad. He kind of finds himself here on Coronatus after being, late in his sort of career and has kind of disappeared into some relative obscurity. In his distant past, hailed from a orichalcum-rich world called Feldspar, kind of born to a community of synthetic life. And on this planet, it so happened where a Concordat expeditionary force, again about 150 years ago, came across the planet, established a sort of resource extraction operation, and an experimental war college there. I think Rhodes and all of the kind of synthetic things living on Feldspar were conscripted into Concordat service. And through that process, working at this, war college here as some kind of indentured servant, finds his way towards some experimental frames that the Concordat has either unearthed or discovered or built themselves through, reverse engineering some of that fundamental nature of the orichalcum. In his time there, finds an opportunity to escape by stealing one of these experimental frames, which is the mech he still has today called the Redshift. In this escape, Rhodes fails to liberate his fellow thralls, and sparks a skirmish that leaves this facility in flames. In retaliation, the Concordat unleashes an orbital bombardment that turns Feldspar to glass to cover kind of all traces of the facility and this uprising and revolt. So for the next, half a century or so, Rhodes finds his way to the ring, leading, a number of wildcat strikes and actions and minor conflicts to help win territory and liberate systems for the ring. He attains a kind of folk hero status within the ring. These tales kind of grow through the telling and pulp novels and the kind of Sem Bellwether stories that we see, papered across pulp rags throughout the sort of associated systems near and far from Imber. He becomes a caricature of the ring's idealism and a focal point of the Commonwealth and Concordat's ire. So through this process, he's kind of out in the galaxy, and after a number of years, during what was meant to be a pretty clandestine surgical strike to liberate one of the Commonwealth space colonies, I'm calling Orcus 5, Rhodes loses control of the Redshift's fundamental power, and inadvertently causes a sort of catastrophic breach on the station, leading to its destruction and the death of thousands. So, shrouded in guilt and fear of unleashing this experimental frame's power again, Rhodes vanishes, and with the help of a ring handler, takes on an assumed identity and fades into relative obscurity in the outer dusts on Imber. So, for the next, 20 years or so, I think Rhodes travels with the drovers of Imber, which are kind of a nomadic band of cowboy Bedouins, herding the giant triops across the shifting sands and the dry seabeds of Imber's changing biome. I think he finds relative peace in this time, having kind of hung up, the rifle and bandolier of his years past, and enjoys kind of this moment of peace here, finding that kind of I don't know, Zen cowboy, mode out here in relative obscurity. But recently finds himself pulled back into the ring's underground network of spies and operatives on Coronatus with the arrival of the Concordat.
Hell yeah. So we said this is the front. Rhodes is a synthetic. I think that's kind of the term we've been kind of gravitating towards when talking about non-human machine life in
Right.
In this setting. What is that? What does Rhodes look like? I guess it's what is this robot cowboy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think Rhodes is bipedal. I think has something of a chassis that we'd recognize as kind of your standard android. I think probably beneath this chassis you can see thick bundles of wire, kind of mimicking musculature. I think his head is not strictly speaking human. Probably has a jaw and a mouth, but I think has sort of a vertical kind of stripe of just white light, which of course is underneath, a cowboy hat.
Yeah.
Something akin to that in the, sci-fi setting. The kind of headcanon references to me are in that anime Appleseed, which is a cop, which is not cool, but the Appleseed mech in that is kind of my draw here. Not as big and bulky, but pretty lithe, relatively human in shape. I think he wears kind of a bulletproof vest-ish looking thing, not like Kevlar, but I think it's a motorcycle vest, over this chassis. And I think has something like a poncho kind of drawn over one shoulder, and something like a bullet belt.
Yeah.
Rose has been on Imber for probably 50 years or so, probably in Coronatus for 2 to 5 years. He's again living under an assumed identity that the ring has helped establish, and the trade-off for that is that he's sort of the ring handlers here on Coronatus know who he is, and are allowing him a level of obscurity that he's comfortable with. But the flip side of that is the handoff's almost like blackmail. Yeah, it's called back in.
And what is Rhodes's drive here?
Yeah, so the kind of specter of the Redshifts like ability hangs heavy over Rhodes. This guilt has kind of followed him since this pretty severe incident where he caused undue harm to innocents. And in this time, this assumed identity has been working kind of like as a mechanic in this scrapyard on Coronatus, or in Coronatus rather. The drive is to really uncover the true nature of the redshift and better understand what exactly it is that he's made off with, which has kind of led him to fame and notoriety, as well as the well-being of a number of others. But the untold power of it is like both kind of like frightening and humbling. I would say one other piece important to note here is I'm playing as the Ace playbook.
Oh yeah, of
Rhodes
course.
is a pilot of like great acclaim. This is sort of like a legacy he has cast off. I think kind of like lives in opposition with this, reputation throughout that like 50 to 100 years of action within the ring. Rhodes is sort of dogged by an occasional foe, a rival that comes with the Ace playbook. And I think that Rhodes has an inkling of who this person or, thing might be, is a Concordat mech that I think has like scrapped with in the past. But who exactly that rival is maybe yet to be seen.
And this is like a mechanic in Beam Saber, like maybe worth shouting out, right? Specifically, in Beam Saber, pilots can declare other individuals as explicitly as rivals, like capital R. This is like very much in the vein of like Mobile Suit Gundam. You have Char and Amuro's relationship,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's the mold that we're in.
Certainly.
And so rivals, yeah, are more powerful than your typical sort of antagonist. And the thing that's fun from the GM's perspective, I can kind of introduce your rival into a situation basically at any time. And that rival also can kind of get to make moves against you also whenever they want. Normally when bad things happen to you, it's because you've rolled poorly on the dice in this game. But your rival can kind of just show up and ruin your day. And to permanently get rid of a rival, you also have to spend your drive clock. You have to like actively work to get them out of your life. And so that's absolutely. I think Rhodes is the only pilot that's starting with one today. But as we go on in the game, anyone can kind of point across the battlefield to this like this other character and say like that's my rival now.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of like upgrades them immediately to like this is now like an antagonist who is going to continue to dog you until you like make that extra effort to deal with them. And so we will get to like see a little bit more of who Rhodes' rival is and what they want as this game goes on. Yeah, is there anything else there we want to hit with Rhodes? I think that's kind of like the.
Yeah, I mean, we got the drive down. I mean, I think the kind of tragedy that places him where he is around this like specter of guilt, both on, Feldspar. I think he failed to liberate like his, fellow synthetic things here. I think synthetic beings in the setting that we're building, I think we'll see exactly like what that looks like in play. Like, I don't know how common other things like Rhodes are in the same way that Rhodes is like fully, sentient and individualized. I think there's probably all kinds of like inorganic life in the setting. Most of it probably subservient in like droids in the Star Wars cast, right? Like, but
yeah,
I think there are probably synths too. I mean, go ahead, Mitch.
I think that's like a thing that's going to kind of like vary between the factions, also, right? Like, I think we talked about like the ring, places like a high value on all life, and I think like there's a lot more like free sentient synthetic life there, whereas the Concordat and the Commonwealth both have very different relationships to that kind of identity, and also that kind of the utility of synthetic beings versus like their dignity or their like innate like right to exist. Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing we'll probably get to dig into more as we explore the setting and introduce these other folks.
Yeah.
Hell yes.
Yeah. Shall we move on to you, Malcolm?
Sure. My character's name is Desmond, call sign Truant. Desmond is a chiropteran, which means that he is a bat person. I think in this case, the bat that he mostly resembles would be a vampire bat, which would also make him very small.
He's a little guy, right?
He's a little guy. I think I originally was thinking about 5 feet tall, but I think no, he's like 4'10". He's solidly in Danny DeVito territory.
That's fun. That's a funny way to phrase it. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what playbook?
This is the Infiltrator playbook. So he is a agile thief and burglar. His history: he was a thief who rolled with a gang called the Belfry Boys right here in the setting that we are playing in, Coronatus, about 12 years ago. So I'm putting him about 34, 35 years old, something like that. So about 12 years prior to the events of this game, he was set up for a murder of a very important Lectorian official and was sent away to prison for about 12 years, doing hard labor, breaking rocks in the hot sun. And he was freed by the Ring and given a second chance. I don't know. Are we getting into that backstory quite yet?
We can talk about this. This kind of ties in with like why you're in this squad. So maybe when we get to the squad, we can talk about it. But like basically, yeah, you were freed, right, and then given. This is like a thing we can talk about now, I guess, right? Like you were offered an opportunity because this is your drive, I guess, too, right? We can talk about what your drive is maybe here.
So my drive is to get revenge on every single one of my old gang, the Belfry Boys.
And so, yeah, like the way that this worked out, like as we talked about it, like, is that like you were freed by the Ring, and then this person comes to you, this person who we're going to introduce as kind of like the handler for this squad, who's like, if gave you the opportunity here to pursue this revenge, or they give you the means to pursue this revenge in exchange for kind of coming to work for the Ring.
Yeah, I received like an updated dossier with all of their information and where to find them, and yeah.
And so like we said, you're the Infiltrator. What's like the special ability that you're starting off with here?
I am starting off with and I think that this is a great ability, the Daredevil ability. When you roll a desperate action, you get +1d to your roll. You may also take -d to any resistance rolls or exhaustion of additional quirk for vehicle resistance against any consequences from your actions. So I guess I like that because it makes the play more interesting, definitely.
Yeah, we'll get into exactly what that means in the game. Once we start explaining desperate actions versus whatever. But basically, what that means is that you can like put yourself in this situation where the consequences could be worse for you, but you do better when you're in that kind of dangerous zone, right?
Exactly.
Like the higher the risk, the better Desmond is going to be able to perform.
It's also just fun to play because it kind of feels like you're gambling a little bit.
Yeah.
You don't go rush that way when you play that.
I don't remember. This might be in this book. This is definitely like a kind of like a piece of advice that shows up in a few different like tabletop role playing games, especially from the like the Powered by the Apocalypse, the Forged in the Dark line. But this idea of like play your character like you're driving a stolen car, and this move is like definitely in that vein. And so, what is
the way you should play all role playing games?
Yeah, it's great advice. I can't remember.
I think it is Powered by the Apocalypse.
It might be from Apocalypse World. And if I'm miscrediting this, my great apologies to whoever originally came up with this great phrase. But definitely this move, I think is like in that spirit. You get into like the really scary spot, but you're better at getting out of it. And so you have a mech as well, right? What is Dez's mech? Just kind of like we'll get like a closer look at all of these mechs once they actually come out on the field. But like, what's the kind of like elevator pitch for the mech you're bringing to the table?
The vehicle name is the Mercuria. The manufacturer is Apogee, and it's a small mech. It's a small man, a small mech. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
It has a sort of bipedal orientation, or omnipedal orientation. Sorry. So it could go from bipedal, but it can also go into a quadrupedal formation when it needs to.
So it's like always facing the right way.
It's always
And this
facing
is
the right way.
Yeah, we talked about this before. This is like I don't know if we're still going with this. This is like the mech that you had before you went into prison. This is like what you used to do jobs with, right?
Yes, part of the deal with the handler was like, oh, also we have your mech.
Yeah,
I'm
pulled
sure I
out of
go
like
and-
police storage somewhere.
Yeah,
or
the
something.
impound lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never
And,
quite
yeah,
made it to
liberating.
the auction block. Yeah.
Well, we'll get into this too. You know, once we get into the game proper. But like your mech especially comes with like a bunch of really cool like. It's sneaky, right? You have camo and stuff.
Yeah, optical camo. What else?
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it. Wait, mobility suite, electronic countermeasures, stuff like that.
Yeah. I love to hear the word countermeasures.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so
Way better than measures.
yeah, countermeasures every time, baby. And so yeah, all together, these three, these are the three characters. These are your three playbooks. All of this, but Beam Saber does this thing that all Forged in the Dark games do. Most do. Maybe there's one that doesn't do this actually. As soon as I said that, I realized I might be wrong. But most Forged in the Dark games do this thing where, in addition to every player having their own character sheet, like you traditionally might, there is also kind of a shared character sheet for the unit that you all play as. In Beam Saber, that unit is a squad of pilots. And so this shared character sheet, it has its own abilities and it has its own kind of like upgrades and features. So I thought maybe we could kind of introduce like the unit that you are all a part of, which we are calling the Black Star Constellation.
Right.
And you guys are a recon squad. That is kind of like the squad type that you've chosen, which the game calls the best way in, way through, and way past. And the cool thing about these is that like your squad has its own kind of experience point track that we're going to follow that you use to level up the squad. And because you're a recon squad, you get an XP whenever you execute a successful reconnaissance, espionage, sabotage, or theft operation, just to kind of give you a picture of like what this squad is going to be doing, right? And so I think specifically we talked about you guys are going to kind of be like more towards like the spies and saboteurs and kind of like like rebels. I think it's a broader category of like things we're doing here.
I mean, I think also it's probably worth calling out that the Ring is like an anarcho-socialist stronghold, probably has pretty well established places where the Ring is the rule of law, but that's not the case here in Coronatus. Like the Black Star Constellation is attempting to set up like a more active cell here in Coronatus. Don't think the Ring is like winning in this city here.
Yeah, for sure. I think like clandestine is like kind of word of the day. Like you're not operating as like an open military unit. A lot of Beam Saber games might have you as more of like soldiers on the front line or like people out there like kind of like publicly doing this work. You guys are at least in Coronatus, like in the city where the game is going to be taking place, you are your existence is not necessarily entirely illegal, although a lot of the things that you're going to be doing are probably very illegal. But yeah, you're not in a base of power. Mm-hmm. And to that end, every squad in Beam Saber has a forward operating base that you work out of. This is kind of like your headquarters. It can be like a very literal, like a military base, or it could be like it's kind of like the place that you work out of. It's where you plan your missions. It is where you go back to like recover and repair your mechs sometimes. It's like the place you spend time when you are not out on the job. So maybe we could like introduce this squad's forward operating base, FOB for short, is like what the game calls it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've described this before as kind of having like a public front in a scrapyard. There's probably like a door in the back in the office that leads, into what would be the front of this FOB, codenamed as Low Tower Base. I think in that same sense, it's like literally a low tower, kind of like an inverse tower going down, reaching into. We've talked about Coronadus before being a sort of mining town in its earliest days, and so is kind of crisscrossed through the understory of the city with catacombs and old mining tunnels.
Yeah.
These kind of like crisscross networks of, probably some are natural caverns and some are dug tunnels, but a network of underground passageways that the low tower touches.
Yeah, I'm imagining even like, Coronadus is old. This planet is old. This world is old. There's probably like old like subway tunnels, things from like older eras of it. Your squad has some like starting upgrades that are built into the squad, and for recon, one of those is a hidden FOB. And what that means is this FOB is hidden from even intensive searches. If it's discovered, a long-term project will be required to once again conceal it. And so, yeah, you have this kind of like underground lair here in Coronadus that you can kind of operate out of and return to kind of move discreetly. And, I think we'll probably get like a little bit more into like exactly what the low tower looks like and, like where in the city it's located, all of that stuff once we start playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to like an FOB, you have an initial reputation for your squad. And this is like a trigger for getting experience points during missions when you act in line with your reputation or you bolster it. I think you guys have chosen daring for your reputation.
That seems apt.
I think that really fits with your was it the daredevil ability you have, Malcolm? Right? Like this is like, yeah, you guys do dangerous work, I think is the vibe we were kind of thinking about. So what else is there about the squad that we need to kind of cover? Your squad, like I said before, has a starting ability in the same way that characters have their own special abilities that they can upgrade. Your squads do as well. We went for everyone steals this time, right? I think is what we agreed on. Which basically gives you guys each a different +1 action rating. Means you're a little bit better at doing the kinds of things you do. You each may add +1 action rating to prowl, finesse, or survey, which are types of actions you can take in this game. And again, that's like another thing I think we'll just talk about action ratings and like how those work and what all of that means once we start using them in the game. But basically, you're all a little bit better at the kind of sneaky stuff that this squad does because of this ability.
And how are we getting direction from the ring? Like when we, are operating here, like, is there a person or a...
That's a great question, Peter. So in Beam Saber, you have a direct superior. And this is like, a representative of your faction who communicates with the squad and gives them their missions often. That's not to say that all of your missions have to come through your direct superior, but they are the kind of like link between you and the big faction, in this case, the Ring. And in this case, because we're kind of doing this like spy squad, we've been kind of characterizing this a little bit more as like a handler, right? In this kind of like tinker, tailor, soldier, spy kind of like mode. And so your direct superior is someone known as Troubadour. Pronouns of they, them. And Troubadour acts as your like I said, your spy handler. They are a member of the Ring's sort of intelligence network, which we're calling the Eclipse. And they personally recruited each of you to kind of form this covert cell, the Black Star Constellation. And they're like the person that you're going to be interacting with, who's going to be handing you missions. We talked about this a little bit. We'll meet them in a little bit once we like do this first mission. But I think that their like actual identity is like a little bit of a secret to y'all. And, I think, before this game started, there's probably a scene for each one of you, right? Where it's like a dark room or something where Troubadour showed up and they basically kind of made the pitch to bring you in. And, this is like you said, with Rhodes, it's like a little bit of blackmail, maybe. It's like, we're calling in the favor now. We're bringing you in. Like, we need you here. Des, it's like, here's that dossier. Like, here's the things that you need to start doing this work. And all you need to get these is to come work for us. I think probably like Carta is like something kind of similar, right? Also on this revenge quest, I think it's probably almost a very similar. Here is information about the people or the company that you're going after. If you want to use this, if you want more of this, if you want access to these opportunities, you can come and do this work with us. Which makes this squad interesting. And I think like we don't have a ton of true believers in the way that we might, there's definitely a version of the squad where we're all sort of ride or die for the ideals of the ring.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting to see how these characters kind of end up interacting with this ideological conversation.
A handful of reluctant antiheroes.
Yeah, something like that. And so because you have this direct superior, you also have some changes to your relationships with the other squads that exist in this world. And we can kind of go over those like really quickly. And then I think we can kind of like break and start on our mission. Because of your direct superior and like who they are, you have a +1. And a +1 here means like you have a positive status with them. They will want to help you more. They will like you more. They might lend aid to you. You have a +1 with the Eclipse. And the Eclipse are the dark gardeners of the endless revolution, planting seeds of insurrection and revolt in the dead of the night. And they are the principal agents of the Ring's intelligence network. And this is the group that they belong, that your handler, Troubadour, belongs to. You have a -1 with this group called the Order of the Oculi. They are Concordat squad. And they are kind of like the secret police of the Concordat. The description here: intercessors from the Order of the Oculi pursue justice for those responsible for crimes against the faith itself. And I think this is like a similar thing in that you're this like kind of spy network intelligence handler has like come up against these secret police, has done things, has run operations against them before, and like has a reputation amongst them, even if they maybe don't know who this person is.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have a couple of starting squad upgrades. We want to cover those and then break, and we'll do this mission.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we'll probably see these up close and personal in some subsequent, action. We took the starting squad upgrades. We mentioned the hidden FOB, which is, the squad's FOB is hidden, even in intensive searches. So if it's discovered, a long-term project would be required to conceal it once again. We've also taken secret routes, kind of dovetailing in with that idea of the low tower touching into some of these underground routes, which I think are probably not even totally mapped. Like I think we've got a handful of them pretty down pat, but I'm going to guess these catacombs and mining shafts probably snake outwards from here. Where they end up, we don't even know. And we also took this scrapyard, which again, kind of comes with the FOB, but the plus side, of course, being we get spare parts on the cheap, which helps to staff and augment a team of mechs here operating in the shadows.
Yeah, and because of those, you have a +1 with this fixer in Coronatus, Books Sirach, who, like I said, is a fixer and a fence. Is this person who kind of like maybe helped you get this cover base of the scrapyard up and running. And you have a -1 with, very appropriately, someone you probably would have already ended up having a -1 with anyways, which is the Grenfield Survey and Acquisitions Company.
It's on site.
You've gotten your secret routes, maybe at least in partially, from like stealing their, survey maps, their data. I think we mentioned maybe some of this is coming from old like survey data that was still left on the mech that Carta escaped with.
Yeah.
But I think, that just about covers everything that is going on with the squad. And so that is, that's the squad. Those are the pilots, the characters that you guys are going to be playing in this setting. And that's kind of like a quick overview of what's going on in the world, and what the world is generally. And I think what's left is we will kind of jump into what I think is not your first mission as a squad ever. I think we're going to kind of jump in, assuming you guys have already been operating together for a little while, but we're going to kind of like jump right into, in a very early mission in your squad's history. And then we're going to go from there and play to find out what happens.
It's our starring cast in America's #1 anarcho-socialist mech war podcast.
I don't want to.
Yeah, actually, I think
I do think that probably Friends of the Table's new season is also about this.
True.
I have not listened to any of it yet because I am not trying to spoil the water. I want to listen to it so bad, and as soon as we hit wrap on the season, I am going to binge listen all of Palisade.
America's second most popular anarcho-socialist mech war podcast.
I'll take it.
And if you thanks guys for obviously for being here, listening to all this. And if you want to just get to the link in the description, there will be a quiz. We'll just make sure that you got all of the information down pat real quick, and just
And
basic
we've got
covering
affiliate
of
links
information.
for,
Yeah.
Be sure to pick up some orichalcum products from Amazon.com.smile.
And I think that's a wrap. We'll hear you here. You'll hear us here next time when we dive right into the action on the dusty old desert planet of Imber.